Which one are you sending it to?
They make it just in time. Nice.
Doing all right, Trace. How about yourself? All right. Wow. Awesome. Awesome.
Butter here, magician escape artist. Practicing for my show tonight. Come on in, have a seat.
All right, everybody settle. Butter, you're on in 5, 4, 3, 2.
In a few seconds, you gotta be enough to get out of this one. Twist a little turn, ta-da! It's showtime. It's your old friend Butter here. I may be a nut, but I know to wear my mask. Please welcome my first guest tonight, fitness guru, Wally Warmer.
Wally Warmer here to tell you to wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds so you will stay healthy and strong like me.
Almond Cruz here, sliding in with the news. Distance is what we must do to stay away from the chew and other germs in the air that might be trying to get on you. Social distancing is a wonderful way to see friends. As long as you're 6 feet apart, you win.
Hey there, friends. I wouldn't miss this for the world. It's me, Pumpkin Spice, your healthy girl. Remember, it's important to use your kind hearts and follow the signs to stay healthy and safe at all times.
Chica Chiminsky here to say, don't forget the little ones that need you to lead the way. That's how we remember to wash our hands, mask, and social distance today.
Morgan Raisin. Yes, it's me, here to sing about health and safety.
This guy's my favorite.
We are all here to help get a message out to your grapevine, teaching healthy choices to stay safe all the time.
Don't let these guys drive you nuts. Put your mask on first. They'll let you be. And it keeps me safe from the
chew
that's trying to get on me.
Butter me up. She's right, you know. Thank you, Hallie Cranberry, for joining the show. Let's all be nuts about our health. Social distancing, wash your hands frequently, use hand sanitizer, and wear a mask. Practice what we learned to stay away from the germ. We're all in this together.
All right, you guys have fun.
Great job, Trace.
That turned out. I was gonna say that turned out great, man. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Oh, I just sort of well those up over the week, and as I do my own projects and I come across, barriers and things that I say, man, you know what? Like, there must be 1,000 other people all over the world who deal with this all the time. I just well up the questions and slowly but surely develop them into almost like little topics or little encapsulated ideas, and then I just throw those on your critique. All right. Okay, cool. All right, well, let's answer them. So, construction project plan. So I asked earlier before I began the session, I just realized my microphone was muted on the stream. I'm totally sorry about that. But earlier I asked you guys, has any of you worked as a team with Blender or worked with other people in Blender before? So there's some of you are new here. So can I ask you guys? Have you had any experience collaborating with Blender before? Oh, one last time.
Not other than Blender Royale.
Zach or Isaac, one or the other.
Yeah, on my last uni project, I collaborated on sort of 8-minute, not really animation, but a series of semi-animated stills.
Nice. And
with three people, it was entirely done in Blender.
3, that's a good number. How about you, Isaac?
I was just gonna say, not other than Blender Royale when we're passing projects back and forth.
Well, that's the experience. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, good. We're growing the industry every Monday. All right, cool. Okay, so I guess there are some things you guys need to keep in mind when you think about working with a team as well. What do you guys think you need to keep in mind? We're going to kind of make this an interactive class. What do you think is important when it comes to working as in a project together?
Hey, teacher, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Fuck, I forgot. It's too real for me. Organization.
Organization. There you go. That's good. Organization. All right. So I guess say that again.
Communications is the biggest thing in my work.
Communication, organization, communication.
I'd also say incentives.
Incentives. Yeah, that's important.
I found that for especially with uni students, like shorter term mini deadlines along the way was like the thing that got us working the most. Sort of by the end of this week, we should have so and so.
All right.
Was the best thing for like quickly producing a lot of work.
Okay. So I will call this task management. using sprints or KPIs, achievable KPIs, things like that. Okay, cool. And I guess, so we got 4 basic columns that we want to keep out to create a project. So, okay, so let's focus on the first question. So the first question is we want to construct a project and get it going. So let me tell you a little bit of a story with this project. I can't say it's the most organized one, but with all of my projects, this is what I do. I always start a project with a task that says create the project. And to create a project, I create the file structure. I create the channel, the voice channel or the thread, because I have a server in Discord. So I create the communications channel. I guess you could say communication channel. I create, with the file structure, I design it's based off a typical project or linear animation format. From there, I also create the worksheets. I also create, with the worksheets, I have a system of like the project metrics. I start creating the metrics already. And then from there, I start working on interviews for like getting the people up and running. And with that, I guess you'd say formalities. So formalities, this is where I start focusing on the incentives, the budget, etc. So with my organization, I make, like I've mentioned here before in a couple of sessions back about project management with you, Marty. So this is basically the same concept of organizing your file structure, having a strong foundation and then from there I can develop my communication by talking to the team and getting the work started, and get the incentives started by like having some actual contracts, payments, and agreements. Contracts is like, okay, who is doing what for how much and in what time, pretty much. And then payments, usually I pay 50% up front, usually, to get the ball rolling, and then when they're finished, the other 50%. It's just a standard thing I do generally because I like to be paid that way. And then from there, I start focusing on task management, which is basically splitting up the entire project into pieces. So obviously I have my pre-production phase, production phase, and then post. And then from there, inside the pre-production, I have it split up even more into things like, into 3 things. In the pre-production phase, I start thinking about story first and foremost. With that comes the animatic. From there, characters, which comes with biographies, sketches or designs, concepts, design iteration. Oh, way to go. And then from there, I start doing the props and the sets. So the sets also goes through a concept stage and a modeling stage. And then we have look dev or look development or the shading and stuff. And then we just have the layout. The props, we also have the same concept, except you don't use layout. Instead of layout, you do rigging for the props. And then with the characters as well, you go through the concept of sculpting, topology or modeling, and then you start going through the process of look dev, which is the UVs and the materials. And then from there, while we're doing that, I'm doing the rigging. So the rigging for this project was very arduous. This took 3 months of work because each character had between 600 to 800 bones per character. Mainly because I did not use shapes for performance reasons. Sculpting also took a little bit because I used multi-resolution and I had to bake the textures, which I needed to develop a workflow to do. And the sketches and designs, I had original concepts and they were not good. So I had my brother, he helped me out and helped me redesign the characters. So we had to redesign and we had to pitch solutions, because talking food is really hard to make it look good. And I'm not sure I did a good job, but I tried to do a good job. But we like provided like hair solutions or clothes or different proportions, more cartoony, less cartoony, more realistic, less realistic. We did a whole bunch of iterations to figure it out. And all of this took a long time. In total, the characters were finished probably after 5 months of work. Meanwhile, the sets and the props were finished after 3 months of work. So it took an extra 2 months to just finish the characters and get their animation sorted and their animation rig sorted and everything. And rigging was the one that took the most effort. But after that, I got my pre-production all sorted. And when I have my workflow divided and organized, it helps me understand how I'm supposed to create my file structure to create the project. So when I'm planning it, I have a general clear idea of what is in the production. So I know that I have to do a block animation. I have to fine tune the animation. Then I have to layout for render. And then I got to do illumination and set up the renders. And then I got to render, pretty much. And then in the rendering, I got to review the renders. I got to fix all the problems, because there's going to be a whole bunch of them. And then from there, I got to also do the composites, and then the final edit with the sound and the export and all of that. So with production is like, also I have to fix and fine tune the rigs, and I have to do characterization. Characterization is like trying to figure, I didn't have a lot of time to characterize. All of my projects I usually don't, and it's annoying because characterization is kind of like the moment you push the rigs to their limits and you test the characters and their personality and you define how they move and how they work before you actually do the production. And we did a lot of characterization, but there was a little bit of falling out with one of my animators who left me high and dry, half contract, which means I had to improvise, and that took a lot of time. So my characterization process was not 100%, but this entire production could be considered a characterization for any future production. So there are some good things that happened in the production, and there are some difficult things that happened in the production. And obviously incentive is one of them, but sometimes incentive is also about availability. It was just the timing was not right. He had other contracts, and then he was super stressed, and that affected things. So no harm. We just had to come to an agreement, and I had to find somebody else, basically. Yeah. But basically, so let's go back to the nitty-gritty, because the questions are nitty-gritty. When I'm constructing a project, what is my phases that I go through? So just to reiterate, I open up the project and set up my system, adopt my pipeline and the formalities and everything to make sure the project is good to go. And then from there, I create my file structure. And with that, when do I know people start working on the project? And what are the pitfalls of bad project management? So when it comes to reusable data, I have a global library in my local computer. This global library is, let me show you what it is. It's basically key maps, matcaps, materials, add-ons, brushes, composite setups, scenes with different things, model library, a rig library, textures, videos, things for Unreal Engine, even the themes for whatever. I want my own key maps. It even has a Blender kit, a library system, and it has a asset management system that I'm starting to make up. It has a huge matcap library that I haven't really used yet. And scripts. Scripts is a really important one for me because this is where I have my rendering scripts and some rigging scripts and my setup scripts as a template, because I don't remember code. So I try to remember everything I have. So I have my global library. But on top of that, I have a GitHub repository of a template of a project, which I started actually just after this one, but all my projects have the same structure. So I have a very clear structure based on file types, and then inside the file type, I organize based on the pipeline workflow. So for example, I have a documents folder, a models folder, a pictures folder, a render pictures for the render sequences, scenes folder, a scripts folder, sub-project for like if I have like multiple chapters, each one will have a clone of this structure but inside their own subfolder, so that I can have a clean project per chapter in the future so that I can scale it. And these folders here would be no longer per chapter but global. So inside of these folders, in the scenes folder, I have numbers and a structure based on what I have. So for example, I have a sub-asset library for the particular project. I have a folder for works in progress of modeling, including sculpting and stuff inside the build folder. I have another folder with characters separate from my build. Inside the build, I'd be doing the sets and the props. So I always divide my project into three: characters, props, and sets, just like in theater. So sets and props would be in the build folder and ultimately go into the asset library. And then when they're ready to be used in animation, the sets and props will go into the layout folder, or just the sets will go into the layout folder. Props can stay in the build. And then characters, they have their own pipeline. I have my character build folder, which is designing the characters in 3D, and then my character rig folder, which is where my actual rigs are used for the animation. And then from there, I have my layout folder, which contains all the sets and preliminary animation. And then I have an animatic folder where I plan my animations in blend files. And then I have my animation folder, which is per shot. Sometimes I use the animation folder as the render folder, and then I have another separate folder for renders like motion graphics or whatever, or the final layout mixed with the animation. And then I have my composites, and then I have my effects folder, which I would usually pull into my composites. And it's basically all of my projects are the same or similar, or they adapt to that particular client. And then inside the pictures folder, I have all my 2D data, including references, progress, textures, and sometimes I even make a texture library for common global textures or things like that. Models is usually from downloads of CC BY or whatever, attribution, or FBX files for interpolation to Unreal Engine. And sometimes I create like a subfolder for Unreal Engine with its own file structure to work with an Unreal Engine project. But I sync, for example, the models could be a clone of my FBXs that would go to Unreal Engine before they get converted to UE assets, which is kind of like a sub-project. Same with Unity or any other project that has their own project file structure. So I use them like sub-projects inside an actual project. So in the end, these nuts, the project that I just did, is a project that is 2.5 minutes. It was 340 gigs of data. So here's my scenes. And as you can see, the structure is very similar: assets, build, characters, layout, animatic, animation, render. Here in my build folder, I have all my the construction of my generics. I have construction for the cameras over here. I have in my characters folder, I've got an iteration of the characters being built, 300 megs. Then each character with its own rig. And then in the layout folder, I have a set for the stage, set for the warehouse. They're combined together into a common set. I have two versions, an old version which was very corrupt and a newer version. And then I had an audience layout for just the about 25 people in the audience with my generic character generator thingamabob. And then inside my animatic, this is where I do the video edit and timing and the story iterations and things like that. And then in the animation, I have all of my shots, each with an iteration of the shots. So for example, in the last shot, I had 2 people work on the same shot. So I had their version and their name, and then I just combined the animation data later on, ready for rendering, linking in the layout to render. So A lot of information, right? Okay, let me just try to minimize it for you. So I have my global library, and then I have my project library. So let's go back to the question to stay on track, because
Can I ask a question about your layout?
Yeah.
So, based on my experience working in collaborations on software development, one of the things that I use that's missing from yours, and I'd like to hear your comments on, is an exports directory. I do this with clients so that I can keep track of what I've actually sent them. What do you do instead of that?
No, I just make a folder called export inside videos. That's all my videos that I give them. Or I give them like a subfolder up here called export, and then I put a copy of the videos or a copy of the images that they get. And that export folder is what I would zip up and send to the client.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, so the export, I mean, it's usually at the end of the project. But for one thing I do is like, another thing I like is in my pictures folder, I have a folder called progress. And inside progress, by date, I have a whole bunch of videos and screen captures of the entire project. And so I like to document the progress inside of the pictures and things like that to show, kind of like go down memory lane to think about things later on. All the hardships and troubles that I had, and work it through and remember what I learned. Yeah. So, for example, this system I used to make generics, a generic generator. So that worked, kind of. I learned some things, you know, how to make characters and stuff like that. Slink. All right, so so that's what I do. Is when I start a project, I set up the file structure, I create, and in my server, I create a voice channel. Here it is here, inside my projects, and I have the team over here joined into the project, ready to start the project. And it's kind of like a log of things inside my server. So that's what I use for communication. I set up my worksheets. So if I go to my worksheets, I plan to migrate this in 2022 to Anchor Point, hopefully. But I create a project here. As you can see, the project is now closed. But inside the project, I have like the budget and the time, and I have an estimate of how many points. So this one took 1,884 points and done in 1,812 hours. So I create the project inside my sprint. So I create a category called the code name of the project, and I divide it into 3, and then I start filling it up with points to kind of get a general estimate of how much the project's going to take, and then do the project. So I got a couple more to finish. And then from there, I start focusing on getting the job done week by week with the general vision. So, what are the pitfalls of bad project organization? It should be obvious. What do you think, Lech? What is the pitfall of a bad project organization to you?
Well, pitfalls of bad project organization. Maybe I can even give examples of this current project I'm working on. I have a desktop where I have pretty much just scattered textures. I have folders for the client. I have all sorts of just assets just strewn across this desktop. Now, what ends up happening, it's very fast to get to about 80% in a project. And you find this interesting 80-20 rule. And with good organization, you never have an 80-20 rule. But when you have bad organization, 80% of the project will take 20% of the time, but the 20% of the project at the end will take 80% of the time.
Correct. Bad organization is practically your biggest enemy for creating work. If you're not organized at the beginning or during a production, your project is just going to hit a wall. There will be a point where things just break and you won't know why. and you won't be able to render, you won't be able to animate, you won't be able to troubleshoot because everything is a huge mess. And you'll be spending time just fixing up corrupt data, fixing up, because you have 340 gigs of data, right? So it's like anything could go wrong. A frame could go wrong, or this could go wrong, or that could go wrong, or this rig could go wrong. If you're not organized with your names and your collections and your file structure, you are making a recipe for disaster. So that's a pitfall of a bad organization. So if you want to take on animation, it's good to be organized so that things work better. Whew. Big chunk of information. I hope that helps. But so let's move on to question number 2. What do you guys think so far? Is it useful? Is it interesting? Are you terrified of animation, or is it nice and clear? Have I made it minimal enough so far, or should I clarify something else?
You're doing a fine job from my point of view.
All right, cool. We got 2 people writing. You guys can open mic if you want, there's no problem, generally. But I guess let's segue into the next question. But basically, how do I collaborate in a team using Blender? All right, so I'm going to go into Blender, and I'm going to create a small mini project, okay? Just to give you an idea, just to make it nice and illustrated. So I'm going to use a copy of my default project, and I'll just copy paste it. There it is. Here's the copy. We're going to call this the Q&A. And the goal of this project is to understand teamwork. All right, so imagine I am now in the pre-production phase, so that kind of limits the scope of what we're working on. So in my pre-production phase, I'm going to go into my pictures folder, and I'm going to go into my references, and I'm going to create a folder called reference, whatever images. So I'm going to download like a block, yeah? See what I can find with block. Images. Yeah, here's a block of cement. I really like this block of cement. I think it's really interesting. And I really like this block of cement. So these are my 2 references, and I'm going to put inside my reference folder. So I have one artist who's collecting references for a number of things. So I can just depend on the person who's collecting references without any work. Yeah, I have that delegate. So if I'm in my Trello, let me go to my Trello or my Kanban, whatever I use, which is here. I've created a task that says gather references. I have the person's working in progress, gathering the references. And that's good. It's in the reference folder based on a system that I have set up. So for example, I need a brick for a house, and he's downloading it. So once the references are done, I can say to my next person, the director or the one who's managing the project, the person he's only good at like, he loves modeling, but he does no rigging, no animation, no lighting. He only models. So I'm like, hey, you're pretty good at modeling. So here are some references. Can you make these models? And he starts working. And so from there, I start assigning him his job. So in this case, I go into the project, which is over here. Save the image. Project, and in the folder, I go to scenes, inside scenes, and build. I have a new blend file. So I'm inside here, and I save this inside the folder, 3D mini projects, Q&A, scenes, go into build, and I'm going to call this block build. I make sure I put a name and a version number just in case, unless I'm using Git flow. So there I have the file, and in this file I start using the references to make a block. So here's my block, and I start modeling the block, and it goes under revision, and I can check it out. But this is where things need to start being organized, because when you're working in the project, I have this cube inside of a mesh. And when I'm working in layout and I give this file to someone else, it's going to be completely useless unless I use a naming convention. So what I do is, if this is a prop, I would say prop underscore block and name the collection. And then I just save it. Why? Because if I need to append data, I can go into my Blender system and turn my recursion to blend file and search for all of the things that says prop as a collection or one level or whatever, to find all of the collections that says props. So here in the props, I have I can search, or I can append anything that I need. So I can just write down prop and it will filter out what I need based on those things, though with this type of recursion or one level it doesn't. So I'm inside the folder, go into the collection. With all of these collections here, I can find the one that says props walls, and it will give me everything that I need in that particular file that just says props. So I can search and filter props, and that's the relevant collection that I need. Everything else is just garbage or sub collections. So the same thing can happen with a set. In this case, this doesn't have a set. So, and also on top of that, if I'm working in a layout scene, I name my files. Okay, this one needs to be linked. This one needs to be appended because it's a special effects. This one is an effects. This one is a character. This one is the rig of the character. This is the mesh of the character, etc., etc. So I have a naming convention, and this will help me because the cool thing about Blender is that you can link and append data, and you can instance the linked data without a problem. So this is my brick. Let me just make some stuff on the brick. Let me just make it individual and then bring this down like this. So this is my new brick that I just made. I will save the file, ready for versioning, and then my other person who's working in layout, so let's make a new scene up here. So my new scene, if I'm working as collaboratively, what I can do, and if the file structure is nice and clean, I can start linking the data. If I go into my build folder, I can go into the collection, I can find the one that says prop, and I've just instanced a collection. I can't edit it unless I use the edit link library, but I have a collection here with what I need. So now I can duplicate it, rotate it, stack them on top of each other, and start creating something interesting with a couple of bricks. Precariously, maybe one over here. And in my layout, I start doing my environment ready for the animation. So if I go back to my scene, so let me just save this file as in the layout folder over here. I'll call this the brick scene, or brick layout version 1. So now I have two people at the same time, and if the other person, he's editing the file over here, and he does something interesting like a flange at the edge here, and he does some changes and he throws on a material. So for example, let's bring up a Blender kit material like this really cool metal brick. Now it's just compiling, and he does some updates to the object. I'm using it because I want it stored in the file for now. So he's made a new object. It's going to be performance hungry because it's a very, I think it's procedural, I think. Let's just turn it to ice to make it not procedural for performance reasons. Jesus. Really performance hungry. Must be because I'm streaming. Alright, there we go, that's much better. So I save this, and if I go back to that file, all of the bricks that I was working on have now been updated. And that's how teamwork basically works. All right, so appending and linking. Have you guys used this a lot in productions before?
I mean, I do when like it depends on deadlines and how much reuse I'm going to have for certain objects. But definitely in this city scene that I've been putting together, I mean, appending and linking and using collections are pretty huge, especially actually for particle effects. I've noticed just using basically linking to then put all my cars that I have, all the spaceships and stuff, all into one collection, so that my particle effect can then pick from that collection, and it appends from another well, it's not appended, it's linked to another blend file.
Yeah. So this is where things can get a little bit complex. All right. So you have like a general thing. So what I like to do is I create libraries and then I use overrides a lot. But sometimes data can get corrupt when you link a link, or override an override of an override. Things can get extremely buggy and unstable. So one of my biggest issues with this project is corrupt data with my layout scene, for example, in the project. But in my layout scene, I had everything linked inside another folder that was linked to a couple of other folders, and some of their folders were linked to a material library. So eventually I had to localize everything and clean everything up and purge data. So for example, I typically work with 2 outliners on my other screen. One outliner can be in like orphan data or the Blender file, so that I can see what is linked and what is sublinked. So you usually get an icon that shows you what's directly linked and what is linked from a link. And it also shows you what is inside the linked data. So this cube is a cube that is linked in from the block of another folder and is linked in from the block build. And it comes in and it's instanced as a prop block object container with a container instance. So I can see exactly where the libraries are and what they have to see how they work. And on top of that, when I'm working with orphan data, in this build, I added a drop down to help me just quickly access the cleanup, to recursively delete unused data, to delete linked data, or do things like that nice and quickly without needing to go to the file menu to do it. So basically, I try to, from here, I usually have 2 scenes inside of a folder. So one of them is called the scene folder, and another one's called a library folder. So when I'm working with a whole bunch of files with a lot of people, eventually before I do layout or before I start doing rendering, I will probably localize every single file and their collections into one file and create one library. And this one library will be what I use inside the layout. And sometimes, to avoid problems, I would localize the library inside the layout and just keep everything local inside the layout. And that's when everybody's contract has finished and there's no more updates to the files to get the job going, so that data doesn't get corrupt. Because sometimes if you link to a link to a link, then override, then link again, you're going to get problems. Because I have debugged Blender, and sometimes you can get override looping. And when you get override looping, this will crash your renders and corrupt your data. So something you need to keep in mind is like, okay, so the linking system is super useful to work as a team so that you don't step on each other's toes, so that one person can model something, another person can make the character, the other person can work on the layout and block the animatic, while another person's animating with the rigs that are still work in progress. All of that can happen at the same time by linking and appending and referencing data. But when push comes to shove at render time, you need to minimize a little bit and localize a lot of the data to make sure that whatever's in the file doesn't go too deep. It helps you got to find a nice balance, yeah? So linking can save you time because files will automatically update when your team is working on them. So the UVs of the character mesh were done by somebody else while you were doing the rigging. And because the mesh was a linked mesh data, the UVs update automatically. That's kind of nice. Things like that. And how can it cause a loss of time? Well, basically what I just mentioned. If you go too deep into the matrix and become disorganized in the way that you're linking your files, it can cause data corruption. Whew. So, is that clear? Do I need to... Should we focus on another example of like data collaboration and linking? Or...
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
Over the years, I developed the rule that you never link to a link. Everything's always linked to the source of truth. And that if you append, you've created a separate object. And that's worked in my projects. What's the situation in which you end up actually needing to link to a link rather than doing it because it's convenient?
All right, let me load the project I'm working on right now. So in this project, I have models that have been adopted. So for example, this food model with these vegetables, downloaded from Sketchfab. So I have a whole bunch of files here, and I have one collection of veggies, and that's what I'm going to use. This is kind of like my source truth. So from there, I had the option of linking this data. So for example, I have a system that was modeled each individually with the shaker, for example, set up inside of its own collection. And okay, cool. This file did not follow the naming convention, so it's a little bit of a mess because I have 56 hours to finish it. Well, less. I have the rest of today to finish it, and I've been working on it since Monday or Friday, really. Slept 2 hours last night. But anyway, but basically, because of these source files are all separated and I needed to do a lot of changes and edits, I needed to consolidate the data into an asset system. So I consolidated the data that was provided by Sebastian, and from there I created a new folder, or a new file, sorry, inside my scene. Where is it? BB, here we go. Scenes. And then in my assets, I started creating an asset library. And inside my asset library, it was good for blocking out the environment, and the environments turned out okay. In fact, I have the pictures of some of the pictures of the environment here. Progress folder. Let me just, but as you can see, the file is quite heavy and it's got everything relatively linked, and a lot of things are going to break now because some of the source files were changed and the naming conventions of the collections were changed, and so library of libraries breaks. And that's when I realized, oh crap, I'm going to have to do my layout with, okay, cool, nothing broke, but everything is linked. Okay, so I have a collection with an instance, and so from there I link the links of the links to create, for example, this prop has two collections that have been instanced in here, and maybe this collection would have an override on the rig so that I can use this thing. Yep. But it was proving difficult because organization was not very well planned due to time crunch. So what I did is I needed to consolidate my layout scene as the library scene, and just when I could organize my collections as some things that I would use to append to my layout. And now I just have a layout with practically everything. But inside, the principle remains the same. I have a scene with a library. I have a layout, just like the separate blend files, except this is just one blend file. So I have my library with everything in their own collection over here. As you can see, everything is neatly organized. And then I have my layout scene, which is like with all the set. and everything is appended except for the materials and textures. And then I have my set where everything is together with the lighting, and I can use this as a basis for creating what I need. In this case, I can't use library overrides because everything is local. That's the only downside. So I can't duplicate rigs. But in this case, I link the character rig that I use for the animation, and so I can use library overrides whenever I need it. So you can use a mix and match process, but you got to compartmentalize basically that you have a library, you have your source, you have a library, you have a layout, and then from there you have your animation shots. So you have your source goes to a library. It can either be a linked or a local. Local is appended. And then you have your library, which is can be inside the layout or separate, depending on how you want it. Separate as in blend files with their own asset management systems, or in the same blend file, or inside the layout, inside of a scene, which is the top level, yeah, inside their collections. And then in your layout, you reference the library to build sets. And then from sets, you reference the sets, and sometimes you reference the lighting. So sets in my layout, I also have set up the lights. I don't do the lights directly inside of my library. I do the lights in my layout. And then in my animation, I reference the lights, or I append them so that I can animate them or override them. And then from there, I can render directly from this animation shot using scripts for consistent systems, or I can render them separately in any other way. But basically, you got to make sure that there's a flow and that the flow doesn't go backwards. If the flow goes backwards, that's when things start to break. So for example, my library references something from the layout, and then the layout references something from the library. I just created a loop. And this loop will corrupt data like crazy. And this is very easy to do when you're working with characters, or you're working with different types of sources for a dynamic library. So there's one point in your production's case. So in sources is kind of like a pre-production phase, which means you got to keep your files nice and clean. They can be messy if they want, but once you finish your pre-production, it's like, all right, no more pre-production, no more models, no more textures, no more concept art. We just need to focus on the rigs and the characters and the animation. This is when you freeze everything and turn it into a library. And then from there, you can work on the layouts and the sets and everything for the production. Meanwhile, maybe and then somebody at the same team who's working on the original sourcing of your files, they can work on the next project, sub-project. But yeah, you got to make sure your data, your linking of your data doesn't go backwards. But if you have like a filter or a gate between that, you're perfectly fine. And that's when the file menu, external data, pack resources or make paths relative, or report missing files, cleaning up. Cleaning up has been my big friend. Recursive unused data, super important. Sometimes as well, like if I just want to clean everything from links, just clean that out for my library. All of this is super important. It's good to do. And keeping your outliner views, use your Blender file view, use your orphan data view, and keep your collections named and clean. So I have my set collections, I have a set production room, I have a set kitchen room, I have a set bathroom room, I have an extra folder for whatever. And it's still messy because I'm rushed, but I try to keep it relatively clear in my head, at least, so that I can work with Sebastian while he was doing all the models. But there was still a point where I had to say, all right, Sebastian, your contract's done, you did a good job, thanks for the models, I'll take it from here. And I do the animation. But that's basically things you need to keep in mind when you work with people and when you work even with yourself. Like, okay, to what point am I creating work, and by being messy and getting all files corrupt and getting lost. I don't know where my stuff is. I don't know where my props are. I don't know what a set is. I don't know what the status of the set is. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what stage of the project I'm in. You start to waste time, and when you waste time, you waste energy. And because I am lazy, I have to organize myself. If it makes sense, right? So, we're getting on to close to an hour. So, Lech, does that answer your first two questions? Or should we go deeper?
I mean, I usually know roughly what my questions actually are. Most of the time, I actually just want to know how you do your work and how you sort of move forward. I have as I said, I have a desktop and it's filled with things. So sometimes you can't organize. You just simply can't. It's too much is moving too fast, and your client or your boss is just changing the narrative far too many times, and you gotta sort of keep up. But yeah, no, you're doing rather well with all the
Yeah.
all my depthy questions.
Cool. So I guess we'll go on to the last one. So for example, this scene here, this was done using the concept of a linked asset library. So this whole terrain is an overridden library that's linked. And I just duplicated the overrides to decorate the scene. And everything is a link. Everything is a link. And it worked out okay, perfectly fine. But I had a bit more time to do it. And setting it up was a piece of cake, and animating it was a piece of cake as well. But with this part of the project, which is a bit more complex, I can't just instance this whole thing because it needs to be a rig, and we didn't have enough time to rig the whole thing. So we needed to create local data and animate the local data because there's just not enough time to make a rig. Like, that's right. So I just use constraints and animate nulls because there's not enough time. Yeah. So it depends, like you gotta understand basically what you're doing with your data. But the general concept of Blender is you have data inside the file and data outside the file, and that's basically how you work it. So, when I finish a project, what habits do I have to promote learning from my mistakes and oversight you experience while working on a long project with tight deadlines? So just like when I begin a project, I close a project. And when I close a project, I celebrate, I go out in the weekend, I take the day off, I DJ and on top of that, sometimes I go back to my sprint records and I analyze my data. So my projects, I record every single task and amount of points and hours. So I go through the project and I search for all of the nuts and I filter all of the tasks that says nuts, and then I have a general idea of that particular project so that I can see which tasks are in the red, which tasks were predicted correctly in yellow, and which tasks took less time. And I can see it every week by week, and I can see who did what. So earlier in the year, this is when I had the team working, I could see this person took him 8 hours to refine a shot, but in another shot it took her enough time. It took her less time to do the shots, so I can see who did what, how long did they take, why did they take so much longer or less longer, and what did they do, and did they fulfill their contracts in the time that we had set up. And I kind of create kind of like a debrief for myself based on tasks per person, per task, per priority, per stage of the project, and I have them all set up and recorded week by week. So I have very extraneous metrics because I don't know, it's fun. I love playing real-time strategy games, and to me it was fun. So I realized I could create my own game with my work with actual metrics of how people work and how I work. You know, it was more for myself, but it's a concept that can scale to the team. And yes, it's a little OCD, whatever. But whoa, look at that desktop. But basically, when I finish a project, I usually let it sit, let it gestate, enjoy that I finished, relax, step away, and revisit it maybe a couple of weeks later or a month later, archive the project, and then feel terrible because usually when I finish a project, it doesn't feel good because it's like, oh man, so much effort, 1,800 hours, 7 artists, 340 gigs of data, or 2 minutes and a half, 7 characters, over 8 months. So when I finish the project, I go through that to figure out where that I did things wrong. Why did I take so long rigging? Why did I take so long doing the layout? Why did the animation take so long? And then I update my metrics. And then from there, I get a lull, but I usually step away and ignore the project for some time. And then I revisit it later. And usually when I revisit it after some time, I love the project again, because usually I just need to rest. Relax my brain for a moment. Kate asked, did I have a base armature for each character? Yes, I had a base rig. I had one test character, and then I copied that rig and adapted it to the others. So it wasn't 7 different rigs. They all were very similar to save time. So I could do one complex rig and then just adapt it to the other characters instead of creating 7 not so complex rigs due to the time constraints. So it was saving time to just apply it to the other character and remap some things. And that's it. So hopefully that helps you. That's been a nice comfortable hour, chock-a-block of me explaining a little bit about working in teams. So it kind of surprised me that most of you haven't had experience working together.
Well, I'm just a dude who makes renders, so I don't get but a bunch of freelance stuff. So
well, the more you do freelance, eventually you're going to have to start hitting the wall of like you can only have so many hours per day and so much energy per project, that when you start to freelance, if you've got the drive to be more than just single man projects, then you start exploring the concept of working with others to get the job done. And it's still very gratifying. It's a different road. I mean, it's perfectly okay to enjoy your art as a one-man show in your own style and way, but eventually, what happens if you want to make a web series? Are you going to take 5 years making 2 chapters of a web series, right? So if
yes, I'm gonna be Ian Hubert.
yeah, right. It's 5 years to make one episode. But like, you got to think about that. Like, you are gonna die one day, and it's morbid, but time is limited, and time is money. So if you can save time and work with others on a goal together that you all can enjoy and believe in, then it can make animation a lot more gratifying, because you guys just made something by yourself would have been impossible in your lifetime. And this is why, like, you look at animations from like Disney and things like that, and you look at every single minute of animation, and you know that there have been at least 2,000 to 8,000 to sometimes 12,000 hours per minute in a Disney film. And 150 to 500 people worked on it for 3 years together to get the project done. And it is a work of art. So it's a project that's like, man, that's impressive. And can be gratifying if you understand the big picture and work it through or whatever. And also working on your own is perfectly fine, and being organized kind of helps you even on your own. But generally, yeah, if you have like a global picture, you're good to go.
I'm kind of the odd man out in all of this because I'm a hobbyist. I do all of my big projects in software development. And, when you've done projects with 300 people that take 3 or 4 years, you kind of want to step back and just do little things for a while.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's kind of a sweet spot now. A lot of the stuff that I would job out to other people is available through Creative Commons licenses. A lot of models, you don't have to do a lot of the modeling yourself. So I just concentrate on the sweet spot stuff, the things that I enjoy doing. But then I'm not trying to make a living out of all of this. I'm just, random hobby player.
Yeah, that's good. With me, I kind of have to pay my debts, and so I'm kind of like, it's kind of like a business as well. So it's a little, but I agree with you. I don't want to like create a company or create a team where we are 100 people and I don't know, can't remember the names of everybody, and we're not having fun together while we work. To me, my ideal would be like, okay, we're a team of 5 or a team of 15, and we have the capacity to produce a feature film in about 2 years or 3 years because we're just all really good and we like to work together. That would be my dream.
Yeah.
But it's...
I will give one small piece of advice from my software development experience. Question I always ask my developers when they propose shortcuts or workarounds or ad hoc things is, why do you think you have enough time to do it over when you don't have enough time to do it right in the first place?
Good one.
That's really, really true. It's like you're trying to reinvent the wheel to save time, but why not just do it the right way
the first time?
Like there's a little bit of a paradox there, definitely.
Yeah, in software development, you have to develop the discipline up front, and you have to always keep people on the straight and narrow, or projects turn out to take literally 4, 5, 6 times as long as they were originally budgeted for.
Yeah. I think that's something I still need to improve because my estimates of my projects are always off by a lot. And I haven't done my audits yet, and I still need to improve that because, yeah, I don't have an established pipeline. I'm always like kind of like making it work as I go along and then learning from my mistakes. But it's hard to get it right straight in the front.
I actually, it sounds really weird, but to hit my deadlines, and I do it pretty well, I'm gonna say, rather than it being ad hoc, is to actually find other people and collaborate. Like my collaborations are usually in the design phases, and the planning phases when it comes to that organizational phase. All the other collaborations are actually it's very almost like an inverted pyramid where I don't do that much collaboration in the design and the actual building, modeling, rigging, putting all that stuff together. The collaboration is actually all in the base. So it's like, 20 people all throwing their 2 cents in the base of the planning rather than the other way around. And that makes our estimates so accurate. It's almost it's like predicting the stock market down to the day it's going to crash, which it seems absolutely crazy, but 20 people in a room collaborating on the planning actually does do it very accurately.
Yeah, and if you have a clear plan, that's like a foundation. You can't build a house unless you have a strong foundation. That's basically it. Animation and collaboration is like you're making a house. Someone's making the toilet, the other person's making the kitchen, the other person's making the bedroom, the other one's working on the roof, the other one's working on the cornerstones and the fireplace and things like that. But if you don't have a strong floor plan and a foundation for the house, no matter how much you all work to make an amazing house, it's going to be a disaster because the plan was not clear from the beginning. At least the general structure of your project was not clear. The direction of the house building and how everyone's going to work together to make the project is not clear. that if it is clear, it allows for some freedom for the creativity to flow, and for your artists or the people you're working with to not have to worry about, for example, will I get paid? Or will I have concept art? Do I have to do the concept art? Or do I have to fix this rig even though I'm only doing the animation? Yeah. So if it's like nice and clear and organized, and everyone knows where their files are and what their files are and who's doing what and like how to work together or how to flow, but if you're a smaller team or an individual team, how to make your data flow seamlessly between each other with nice clean conversations so you guys have a good time, you know? That's part of the fun. Is like, okay, as Joey mentioned that he quoted me, it's like, you're all gonna die. But also, work is not just work. You got to enjoy it to find purpose. So it's also, being organized helps you not need to worry about these things later, because you already worried about it in the past when you started the project, which means you can enjoy the process. So that's the benefits of being organized with your project management. Not only is it good for teamwork, but it's also good for enjoying the project because you are organized, especially when things start to get complex. And so let me show you like some of the complexities that I find with these projects. For example, I have problems with the lips, problems with the rigging and the arms. But where's my, let me just bring up my biggest errors that I found. A random override with a dependency cycle in the rig. See if I can find it. There it is. These are some of the errors that I found during the process that just ruined the whole shot. Like it's it's terrible. Or things like this, you know, the eyes just pop out because the lattices were no longer working on the overrides. And it took me a whole week just trying to troubleshoot these rigs trying to figure this out. And what I had to do was basically disable the lattices and not use them because I couldn't fix it. And this one here, the tongue was growing to infinite and then shrinking to infinite and then growing to infinite throughout the entire animation, and it was bizarro. Same with the lips and things. So you find these problems when the project becomes extremely complex, and you have to kind of like, if you didn't know where your characters were and you didn't know what stage the characters were in, it would be difficult to troubleshoot and things like that. Or even like issues like this. This is almost artistic. This was a bug from Blender where the overrides were not refreshing correctly. So I had to update the build to get these renders going, but this had me get a headache. But yeah, so Kate's got to go. Thanks for hanging out. And thanks for being all here. Joey mentions being organized means less work later. Yes, if you're a lazy person and you don't want to work so hard, be organized. So thanks everyone. I'm going to finish the stream here and get back to work, have some lunch, and I really appreciate you guys hanging out until the end. Impressive.
Of course, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Jace. It was worth hanging out to the end. Enjoyed it.
Excellent. And thanks for these questions, Lech. Like, these are excellent. And also, just before we go, we do have one render to take a look at. Slink's Green Forest. I really like this light colored light here in the corner here. But this gray smudge across the sky, I'm not sure what it is. Is that a cloud? It's volumetrics. Okay.
Where is this picture? How did you get this picture?
God rays, yeah. Inside the Q&A&Critique thread, there's a micro thread, a new feature from Discord, where you can like create a sub thread and it would last for about 24 hours or so. and you can like, if you're in the chat and turn it on, it gives you like a list of all these threads, and you can see them and like comment on that particular thing exclusively for just a time before it automatically archives.
Interesting. I like it.
Yeah, it's
Thought threads would be really, really, really bad, like a bad idea, like really bad idea, but that's good implementation.
It's has been a system inside Teams and Slack for a very long time, so I'm kind of happy that they made it auto expire so that people still focus on the threads. But
Yeah, that's the key.
yeah, I like your render. You've been iterating this for some time now, Slink, right? What is your big ambition? What's your vision with this shot? What would you like to do with it? Make it look cool. Alright. Well, I think you're getting there. What I would love to see more is some of this yellow. The contrast with the dark and the light. Generally with the whole image, it's very the same tone of gray or dark grays. And the only light is where you want the people to look, which is nice. But I'd love to see more of it, more intention with your composition, with those highlights that you have there in the sunlight. Simple man with simple
Yeah,
goals.
you seem to be missing so when cameras sort of take a shot, um they always take the brightest possible thing and make everything darker. So your exposure isn't quite balanced right now. Just from looking at your highlights, they're not there's nothing white in your scene. It's all
Be just
you
a
got
one
some
leaf.
blacks, but there is nothing white.
That would
Yeah.
really add to the scene.
What would add to it?
Falling leaves.
Oh yeah.
Just a little bit of falling leaves and a depth of field. Like, just have like a leaf just like out of
Sitting on the camera lens or something. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Another thing is your god rays is kind of pointing to I don't know where. So
Alright.
I would do the god ray directly down towards the camera or perpendicular to
Oh yeah,
the trunk.
definitely God rays.
Say that again?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, cool. Like a very high HDR, says Rathamat.
Maybe a bit of lens distortion.
A little bit. Oh, there is in the corner here, yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's okay. Though, here's a tip about chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration only happens in high contrast areas. In this low contrast area, you wouldn't be able to see it so much because there's not enough light to actually split in the shadow. So you would see chromatic aberration more around here, where there's a high contrast between the leaves. So when you work your composite trees with chromatic aberration, I know it's like a global setting that everybody puts on the lens, but you gotta also put in some luminance and contrast filters. Rathamat suggests that it's very HDR, which is like what I mentioned earlier. It feels like a high dynamic range, which means there's not enough contrast to lead the story. If your story is to look at like a bird flying through the sunlight over here, then you would darken everything else to make it more of an exposure is focused on the bird. The white bird.
Rathamat saying the same thing. It doesn't contain enough intensity in the upper ranges to produce these lens flares and aberrations.
Cool, I really like the trees though. It's looking nice. Especially this green part here. I really like it. Alright guys. So if you want, you can hang out here. I gotta get going. But thanks for your time. I'm going to stop the stream here so you guys can feel free to breathe. And thanks for everything. I hope me sharing some of the info and experience of how I organize myself helps you. And I'll see you guys, same place, same time next week. And thanks, Lesh, for the questions.
See you, man.
Not a problem. If you don't have questions next week, I'll generate some more.
Hey, awesome.